On today's Locked On Jayhawks, is Bill Self going to play any too big basketball this year? I feel silly even asking that question with Bill Self, but maybe the better question is how much too big basketball will Kansas and Bill Self play in the 2025 to 26 season?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. And thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's version of Locked On Jayhawks, we're talking a little Kansas basketball. Is Bill Self going to enroll the too big lineup at all this year? And how much are they going to play it for? We're going to actually look at some of the recent seasons. Has it been overblown, how much they've used it, and what that could tell us about possibly will they use it this year? They still don't have that many bigs on the roster, so we'll get into all that on this episode, and why I think Jayden Dawson should play big minutes for this team. Plus, we'll finish up with some of the latest news. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Okay, so the short answer, will Bill Self play any too big basketball? You know, do I drink water every day? Yes. Like there's probably going to be a moment in time where he does it. But there's a difference between, Bill Self throws out a too big lineup for 2 minutes in a random game and, it's their primary lineup, or, it's a lineup they're starting with, or, it's a lineup they're using for 20 minutes per game. And I don't know that it's going to happen to that level necessarily, but I do think at least, I don't know, it almost feels like some of the best teams in the country, we've seen them kind of steer into the big thing. Like Florida might be playing Thomas Houck at the 3 this year, right? Like they're steering into the big thing. And Houston has typically played, under Kelvin Sampson these last couple of years, like 2 bigs next to each other. Neither one can really space the floor or shoot. Like there are certain teams who are trying to, like Gonzaga has typically been a 2 big team. Arizona is typically a 2 big team. Duke has been a 2 big team. There are teams that are basically saying we're going to try to wall up other teams on the board and get those extra possessions and, use some of the advantages of playing too big basketball. And so you're going to be stuck in certain matchups, certain situations where you do throw out a too big lineup to counter what the other team has. Will Kansas find that a too big lineup works well for them in certain situations too? That's entirely possible as well. I think the biggest question that might hold you against playing a good amount of too big basketball this year is just the lack of depth, because you get into a question of, okay, if you're playing a second big, let's say you're playing Bryson Tiller at the 4 next to Flory Bidunga at the 5, or if you want to say Tiller at the 4 and Mbiya at the 5, or if you just want to go with like ultimate, we don't have a big man who's going to shoot outside the paint, but we're going to block literally every shot and grab like every offensive rebound. We're going to play Flory at the 4 and Mbiya at the 5. Whatever too big lineup it is, you run into an issue of foul trouble or the lack of depth by playing that way, right? By only having really 3 true big men on the roster, it puts you in a bit of a bind if you play that way in terms of not having a lot of bodies left on the bench behind them that would stay from getting tired, that would stay out of foul trouble. Now, I say that, and this past season, I think it's good to point out that like they played 2 bigs even when KJ Adams was hurt this year. And why I picked that specific stretch of play is because when KJ Adams was hurt this year, that also coincided, I believe, when Zach Clemence was hurt this past season. And so you didn't really have a lot of bigs on the roster this past season, right? I mean, it was Hunter Dickinson and Flory Bidunga, and that's really it, right? I feel like I'm missing somebody, but like they were still playing too big basketball even to that point in time. So, for instance, KJ Adams was injured. He missed the Kansas State game that Kansas won in Lawrence, and Kansas started Flory Bidunga next to Hunter Dickinson. Flory played 25 minutes in that game, and that's despite having 4 fouls. Hunter Dickinson played 34 minutes in that game. They didn't use a single bench bigs. They were able to cross over the minutes when they needed to, and they played a lot of too big basketball. In the Houston game, where Kansas should have beaten Houston, but they blew it twice, and that game KJ was also out. Again, Flory started next to Hunter. Hunter played 45 of the available 50 minutes. Flory played 36, even though he fouled out. And once again, they played 0 bench bigs, which is crazy to think that they only played 2 big men, and they started 2 of them in a game against Houston that went to double overtime. And again, I think Clemens was hurt at that point and KJ was hurt, so you just didn't really have the option. But point being, even though Kansas only has 3 real big men right now, and I guess theoretically, like I've said this before, you can use Simis Calderon as like a 4-man, because of his wingspan and his length and athleticism. Or if you really wanted to, a small ball 5 in terms of like a break glass in case of emergency guy, or I guess you have a walk-on and Justin Cross, right? Not that I expect either of those things to happen. But even though Kansas is, still doesn't have a ton of bodies with, again, basically 3 true scholarship big men, they played a good amount of 2 big basketball last year when they only had 2 bigs in a couple of those games. So why am I not to think that even though 3 bigs isn't a lot of depth, it's still more than they had last year when they were playing 2 big lineups? Why would Bill Self not play it with the 3 possible bigs that they have? And I do wonder too, like as much as, I don't know, maybe Bryson Tiller's skill set works even better if he is in there as a 4, being a skilled 4 who can oversize, if you have like a wing or a guard that's kind of guarding in on him and he can overskill them in the post. Maybe that works better for him than playing at the 5. Maybe he's a little more out of position playing at the 5. I don't know. I think the question to me more so just comes down to realistically, like how long are we asking? So looking back at some previous seasons, Kansas used the Flory Bidunga, Hunter Dickinson lineup for 243 minutes last year. Hunter and KJ played 697 minutes together. I would count that as 2 big basketball. KJ and Flory totaled 236 minutes together. So basically, Kansas last year was playing 30 minutes per game of 2 big basketball. That's 3/4 of the time. Obviously, if you don't count KJ to that, it would be a lot less, but still. And obviously, the year before that, when it's a lot of KJ and Hunter, you're playing a lot of 2 big basketball as well. So what if we go back to a year before, where it's not just this core of players that they recently had? If you look at the 2023 team, we barely saw any 2 big lineups for 2023. I mean, they were more so just trying to rotate and find one big who was going to be the starting center. Obviously, Zuby has taken off at St. John's since then, and you had Ernest Uday and KJ rotating around, but you weren't really playing 2 bigs like at all. Same with 2022, and same with 2021, right? You weren't really playing 2 big basketball. Now, 2020, on the other hand, which I think maybe that's the most apt comparison, because if you're an everydayer, we have made comparisons to how Bill Self has built this roster to that 2019-2020 team. Not necessarily that it's going to be as good as that team. That team was like by far the best team in the country. They're so dominant. I wouldn't put that high of a bar on this team. But just in terms of the style of play and the archetypes of players that Bill Self has brought in, it almost feels like stylistically he wants to kind of be similar to that team. So maybe we look at that team for the best example. In 2020, is actually kind of similar in some ways. So Big Dave played next to Doak for 168 minutes over the course of the season. We saw Doak play next to Silvio for 30 minutes, and then we saw Silvio De Sosa play next to Dave for 17 minutes. So total it up, that's 215 minutes of 2 big basketball that they played in the 2019 to 2020 season, which on average, when you take the amount of games they played, that's a little over 7 minutes per game of playing 2 big basketball that year. And that's also a roster where they basically just had 3 bigs. Udoka Azubuike, David McCormick, and Silvio De Sosa. They didn't really have any other bigs on that roster either. Similar to this one, which has, 3 bigs. And I guess in this situation, like this year, Flory would be your Doak, your big center who's going to, block shots and dunk things a lot. And Mbiya would be Dave, kind of your younger center coming off the bench who has some potential. And then Tiller would be Silvio, as more of a, I don't know, hopefully sans chair, but maybe more of your big man that, I think Tiller may be a little more skilled than Silvio. It's not a perfect comparison comparing all the players, but just in terms of role necessarily. So anyway, based on that, I guess I would use that number to assume, like, if you want to widen the gap, say 5 to 10 minutes of 2 big basketball per game for Kansas, but most likely between 6 to 8 minutes. And let's say we do see that same number as that year. That number would be 7 minutes per game. That basically means you have 40 minutes to give out at the center position, and you have 7 more minutes of 2 big basketball, which means between Flory Bidunga, Paul Mbiya, and Bryson Tiller, you would have 47 minutes to divvy out between the three of them, which, you can work it out a lot of ways. You can go Flory plays 25 minutes, Paul Mbiya plays 12, Bryson Tiller plays 10, or Flory plays 28 and Mbiya plays 12 and Tiller plays 7, or Flory plays 24 and Mbiya plays 10 and Tiller plays 13, right? You can work that in a lot of different ways, but I think that's a good number to kind of, as we project the lineup, and we will have a minute's projection in an upcoming episode. I think this is a good jumping off point. But I guess point being, I don't think we're going to see a lot of two big basketball, and it'll be far from one of the top 2 or 3 lineups for KU, but I still do expect to see it for a handful of possessions and a handful of minutes from game to game over the course of the season for KU. All right, let's continue on. Why I think Jayden Dawson should play big minutes for this Kansas basketball team. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just it is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Sometimes you just have that month where it feels like things are constantly piling up. I'm having one of those months right now. My car, transmission's going out. Feel like there's a lot of stuff around the house. Vacation coming up where it's just like the bills just keep piling up, right? I mean, kids are expensive in general. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money, who's going to help you get in control. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at Monarch Money for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year with Monarch Money. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget to make Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. Okay, so I'm going to explain. I think Jayden Dawson should play 30 or more minutes per game for this team. I don't know, maybe 28 or more minutes per game. 30 seemed, maybe that's, what's the difference, 28 and 30? I think he should play big minutes for this team. And I do think it's interesting, like, it seems like some of the recent scuttlebutt, some of the recent noise, so to speak, is that Elmarko, who we had a episode on talking about why he could have a breakout season. And I am high on Elmarko, but that the combination of like Elmarko, Council, and Peterson, like what if those 3 guys are ahead of where Jayden Dawson is? And so I think it becomes difficult because to me, even if Melvin Council and Elmarko Jackson are better players in a vacuum than Jayden Dawson, doesn't necessarily mean they should play more, because the fit has to matter a little bit. Now, obviously, if they're so much better, then you can understand that. But if it's like, I guess to put this in 2K rating terms, you know what I mean? Like if one guy's an 82 and the other guy's an 80, but the guy who's an 80 fits the team better and does things that you need on the floor, like 3-point shooting, I think you need to play that 80 a little bit more than the 82. You can't just play things based on who's the most talented. We've seen that issue before, right? And so when I look at this Kansas team and I look at some of their strengths, I look at some of their weaknesses, they need to find a way to maximize the little bit of 3-point shooting they're going to have. Especially going back to our first segment here, if you're playing 5 to 10 minutes of 2 big basketball, let's say you're doing that 7 minutes per game of 2 big basketball, those 7 minutes need to come with as much shooting on the floor as possible. And I get it if Bryson Tiller's playing as the 4, like theoretically he can shoot the 3, but he was in the 20% at OTE. You want as much shooting as possible 1 through 3. And so what would be the best guard combo to play if you were playing a 2 big lineup? Well, I think Jayden Dawson would have to be one of those guys, is one of your best 3-point shooters. Maybe you go with Cole Rosario and then you have Peterson out there, or whatever point guard at that moment in time is out there for KU, that you can have the point guard, and then you have 2 wing shooters plus the 2 bigs. That makes sense for that specific lineup. But as we said, that could just be 7 minutes per game. So what about the rest of the game? Well, it's not just for when you're playing a 2 big lineup that the 3-point shooting is important. And I guess part of this is like, if Elmarko Jackson does end up being a 35% 3-point shooter or something like that on decent volume, then sure, it takes away some of the pressure to do this. And then it's, or if Melvin Council ends up having his best 3-point shooting year, right? If he shoots 35% on 3 or 4 attempts per game, then all of a sudden this is a different conversation. I'm just kind of basing this on what those guys have produced up until this point in their career in college basketball, which, as we know, players do get better and can get better at things. So that can change. But as it stands right now, Dawson is KU's, I don't know, I get like maybe the best 3-point shooter among rotation guys. I mean, maybe you could argue Darren Peterson, just because he's great at everything. Again, like I said, like maybe El Marco develops into it. Maybe Rosario is in the rotation and stroking it at a high level from what we saw at the end of his, I guess, prep career. But I think, to me, based on the proven stuff, Dawson is someone who can both shoot the three and play the three. And that isn't a super common skill for this current Kansas team, current roster, I guess, like in terms of, I don't know, I guess he's not like a real three, but like when I'm saying Elmarko Jackson and Melvin Council, I guess, again, does it really matter? Like they could probably guard threes because of their athleticism and length, but I don't know, man. I view Jayden Dawson as being somebody who can be another scorer, being another 3-point shooter. And I just don't see enough of that on the roster overall. And it helps too that Jayden Dawson's a sniper from the corner. And that's like, you look at this past season, Rylan Griffin and AJ Storr, how many times did it feel like they got like a wide open corner three and just didn't make it? And that's the thing with Jayden Dawson. He shot 47% on corner threes last season at Loyola Chicago, 47%. A year prior, he was at 36.4%, so certainly down from where he was this year, but 36.4%, that'll still play. That's still a good percentage, right? For his career. So you take his full 3 years at Loyola Chicago from the corner to give us the best sample size possible, 41 of 94 from the corner. That's 44% almost for his career from that zone. So he's a good corner 3-point shooter. So that's where it's like, it's not just that he opens up the floor for the bigs. He opens up the floor for Darren Peterson. He opens up the floor for a slashing Melvin Council or Elmarko Jackson. It's that he's good in an area that Bill Self will probably want to utilize him from. And so it really wouldn't shock me if like early in the year we do see Dawson coming off the bench again. Like maybe they do end up going with going back to the comments Bill Self made that Elmarko Jackson would have been a starter last year, right? And Melvin Council has that kind of dog in him that Bill Self is going to love and might be the best perimeter defender on the team. That maybe we see the starting lineup at the beginning of the year be Peterson, Jackson, Council, and then Trey White at the 4 and Flory Bidunga at the 5. Maybe that's what we see at the beginning of the year. It would not shock me if that ended up happening and then we saw a change later on in the season. Similar, again, we're making another comparison to that 2019-20 roster, and it was a little different. That 19-20 roster didn't start with the first month of the season. They're always starting Isaiah Moss out there. Part of it was because I think Moss began the season injured for KU, that he had to kind of battle through that a little bit there. But they really took off the most like in January. Isaiah Moss starts playing more minutes for KU. And I could see that being the case with Jayden Dawson, where it's like maybe he's playing 20 minutes per game. He's behind all these other guards. And then they find that like they need the 3-point shooting. When he's on the floor, it's making a big impact. And then, the last 2 or 3 months of the season, he is playing closer to 30 minutes per game. I could kind of see that being the case because maybe KU's best 5 players, so to speak, don't match up with their most cohesive 5-man lineup. Again, similar to, what Moss did though. And then again, maybe later in the year, this comes to fruition. Again, if Elmarko's hitting, 35% from 3 and Council's at even 33% and Peterson's at 36%, then it might not be needed. But what if Elmarko is at 30%? Again, he shot 27% as a freshman. What if Council's at 28, which is around his career average? What if Peterson's at 33 or 34? Like it might turn out that Dawson becomes the best fitting piece for Kansas and Bill Self. And in an offseason where you have focused on fit above all else, why not go with the guy who fits in a big way that can help you in a skill that I do have one of the bigger questions about this team about. I think they're going to be good in athleticism. I think they're going to be good on the defensive end of the floor, which Dawson is a solid defender as well. I think they're going to be good in a lot of these different areas. 3-point shooting is one of those questions, and I think Dawson can certainly help them out in a lot of ways there. All right, let's finish up here on this episode of the show with some of the latest news. Talking a little KU baseball, making some more portal additions, some NBA, and college basketball video game coming back. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Again, you can find Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. Okay, some of the latest news across the KU athletic sphere. Darius Henderson, who is a pitcher from the junior college ranks, was a junior college champion this past season. He had a 6-0 record, 10 saves, a 1.76 ERA. So really good relief pitcher, fastball in the mid to upper 90s. He has committed to Kansas. So we know that obviously Kansas has brought in some good transfer portal pickups from D1, but we know a big part of their DNA and what Dan Fitzgerald has, I guess, gotten them to be, it comes from the JUCO ranks and finding really good JUCO talent. You think of Brady Ballinger, for instance. I mean, the more success stories you have, the more it's going to keep recycling more good players from JUCO to want to come to you, especially with that being, maybe a little bit more of an untapped resource right now with the way that teams are hitting the transfer portal. So really good addition there for KU, and really feels like they continue to lengthen out their pitching staff, lengthen out their bullpen, because they had a couple, possible frontline starters this past season. I know it didn't finish that way, that they didn't have their best stuff in the NCAA tournament, but overall this season, they had 2 frontline guys. They didn't always have the depth, and maybe if you have better depth, those frontline guys, maybe they're a little more rested come the NCAA tournament too. Like that can be part of it as well. A KU football commit, not just KU baseball. Ben Shipley. Ben Shipley is a punter, and he is committed to KU. Sounds like a preferred walk-on. He's 6'5". I don't know if it says on his Twitter profile, kicker, punter, and receiver. I'd imagine in KU it'll just be kicker, punter. But the fact that it says on here 4.8 40-yard dash, that's probably pretty fast for a kicker. I don't know. Maybe you can run some trick plays with him. Also being 6'5", right? I don't know. Some trick play opportunities that you could do. So there's that, because KU's both kicker and punter, I believe, are seniors this season. So you do have to develop the next guy in line. The next piece of news is NBA related. Svi Mykhailiuk is getting his contract guaranteed by the Jazz, according to Tony Jones of The Athletic. And just kind of cool how Svi has been able to stick in the NBA. He hasn't been a guy who was like, starting every game or, putting up 15, 20 points per game. But there is a skill to staying in the NBA for a long period of time and continuing to cash checks for a long period of time. The fact that he's a good 3-point shooter, and the fact that I think he's just a good guy in the locker room. Like, you don't make it. So this will be his 8th year this upcoming season in the NBA. You don't make it 8 years in the locker room if you're not a superstar. If you're, let me think how to rephrase this. If you're not like a starter level player, a star level player, which Svi hasn't been, you don't make it 8 years in the NBA without a important skill and being a good locker room dude. Because at that point, the NBA team will just be like, listen, dude, you're our 7th man. You're our 9th man. You're our 11th man. Like, why are you causing trouble for us in the locker room? See ya. Go play in Europe or whatever it is. You don't have to worry about that with Svi. Like, good dude in the locker room, makes his threes, works hard. And just cool to see how long. I tweeted this out there, but like the list of Bill Self players, and this can obviously grow, right? Because you have guys like Christian Brown and Ochai Agbaji and stuff that haven't had the opportunity to. Will they end up having, an 8-year career or something like that? But the list of Bill Self players, Bill Self Jayhawks, that have played 8 or more seasons in the NBA, and some of these are still counting, but they've already hit 8. Joel Embiid, Andrew Wiggins, Kelly Oubre, Ben McLemore, the Morris Twins, Mario Chalmers, Cole Aldridge, Darrell Arthur, and Brandon Rush. That is a pretty darn good list of Jayhawks, and Svi gets to join that, which is really cool. The last piece of news here is a college basketball video game, according to EA Sports, is back in the works. We had the return of EA College Football, which was awesome to see and awesome for KU fans to get to play with. Obviously, KU fans specifically have been championing for where's the basketball game? Where's the basketball game? Where's the basketball game? I hope they have some sort of, ode to some of the best teams that of the years that they have been missing, right? The EA Sports one went away in like 2010, 2011. The 2K one went away in 2008. There's a lot of good teams that got missed from the video game. And so I hope they have, some of those teams in there that you can play with some of the, the OG teams that we met. Like I put this out there, like who would you most want to play with of these teams between, I guess, 2011 and now? Like if you look to the, I don't know, like the 2012 team would probably be fun to play with. Jeff Withey blocking shots, like T-Rob just dunking things and stuff. But I think 2014 would be really fun in a video game. Like Wiggins and Embiid would have been really good in that game. And I don't know, like 2017, 2018 are just going to be favorites for people. And that's always a fun one because video game, you think of like, what's flashy? Can you shoot? Like that's what those teams had. 2020, people just want to avenge that team. 2022, obviously national champion, a lot of good players. There'd be a lot of fun ones. Stinks we don't get it this year though, so you can't play with Darren Peterson. But maybe there'll be an all-time great team too, and then you can play back with one of those teams as well. But cool news there. And then apparently like 2K might get into it too, which is cool because I always liked College Hoops 2K better than the EA Sports one. But, competition is good because typically breeds better games because they have to actually try harder and not just be like, oh, we only fixed one thing and that's the new thing in our game, or we took this out 10 years ago, we brought it back. That's our new feature in the game this year. Anyway, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you next time for another edition of LOJ